This was a game I had to watch twice, given I had a bit more time since we aren't playing on Saturday. Watching the game a second time, I realized our performance was satisfactory. If we base our judgment solely on goal-scoring chances and the final result, everything becomes debatable. In reality, as they say in some footballing nations, we were the team that controlled the game. While our rhythm wasn't quite like a space rocket, we maintained control with an estimated ball possession of nearly 65%. However, possession isn't everything. Point Cook had 9 corners to our 3, demonstrating the importance of fast counter-attacks in football. The game began with a few clearances from our end, and it took about 5 minutes before we gained control. We tried to exploit the wide areas, but their high pressing limited our success initially. These issues were prominent in the first 10 minutes, but we became more dominant in our possession as the game progressed. There were other factors that affected our play, and we'll address those briefly.
That was an introduction by my AI assistant, but I think my Middle European accent is more pleasant, and I think you're more used to that. First thing, let's talk about vertical balls. So vertical balls in sort of also called assists. For what I mean are those intended penetrating passes into dangerous areas. They are the ones played in behind and which attempt to create a shooting opportunity for one of your teammates. These, as you are seeing now, these might be seen as perhaps the most wasteful part of our game, especially that seemed to be the case in the first half. However, they are very difficult to criticize, as often one of these also called killer passes can decide a game. We tried a few, as you are seeing, but as I always told you, remember that it only has to work once or twice. I counted only 7 crosses or cutbacks altogether throughout the game. I would say the usual. We can certainly do better, but the main one on the 62nd minute gave us the lead. And the ones that you're seeing now are the others. And they can't work every time. They've worked previously in previous games. So it's one of our weapon. However, again, before we attempt to cross the ball, can we please ensure that there are players in the box? Otherwise, please go to the byline and get us a corner like Kaz did in the second half. We played up from the back every single time we could do that, which confirms that we were in control of the game. Interestingly and quite curiously, though, we stopped doing that from the 67th minute, which means we decided to go long every time once we went ahead. Now, which made us, in my opinion, a lot more schizophrenic in the approach. Is that what we want? And who made that decision? This brings us into our final discussion. Mid block or high press? We scored right after we sort of pressed high, but in most cases, our approach is still very disorganized. So I'm going to show you quickly a few clips throughout the game when we attempted a high press and when instead it looked like we were not too sure on what we really wanted to do. A few minutes into the game, probably 5 minutes into the game. Okay, so the keeper played the ball out. Joel made that run and pushed the ball carrier out. Ollie is taking care of the right back. However, we are very, very loose here in the middle of the park. So even you should have dropped here and Cody, that was going to be your player so that we can open up this channel and force the ball down here so that we can win it easily. By the way, Jimmy was excellent in the approach, showing the player out. Only a minute later, keeper plays the ball. Again, the player that was the closest in this case, I think he should have been Ivan, that made that run that way, so that this player is forced to direct his first touch towards the outside. Kaz You should be here, not here. Here we are a little bit loose, but I must say Jimmy is tracking, and automatically, Joe, you know that if one goes, you have to drop on the nearest central midfielder. Now we can't see Ollie here, so we don't even know what's going on that side. Having said that, what will happen now is that because this run is not initiated straight away, they can shift the ball across. And it's very slow. And again, we can now initiate another one, which again we can't do because the type of run is again direct. And so they keep going from one side to the other, and we just watch. And a decision will need to be made on whether we initiate a high press or whether we go into a mid block. And this is something that I will show you in a minute. We are, I believe, on the 38th minute of play, and this is a very, very interesting clip for you to watch. They just got a free kick, and our two center forwards, or our number 9 and 10, are in what looks like a 4-4-2 formation, ready to toggle across the park horizontally and prevent passes in behind. Now, the problem that I've got here is that you can't see anyone in behind here, which means that we are already stretched vertically. And we don't know yet whether we're going to go into a high press or whether we are going to go into a mid block. What happens next is interesting because they play out. Joe initiates what looks like a high press. But if this is a high press, then we have a problem. Yes, Ollie is about to shut down their right back, but the problem is everywhere else on the park. We are so stretched, and on top of it, the first reaction should be for Cody to go and mark this player, and as well, even your first reaction should be that of dropping onto the nearest central midfielder, which was that number 8 that gave us so much grief. Instead, we didn't do one or the other, and that is my problem with this approach. If we go into a mid block, we go into a mid block. If we go into a high press, we go into a high press. Eventually, though, I mean, football is a funny game. Eventually, they did it themselves. The ball was kicked out. Good enough, but from a structured point of view, we can do far better. This is also very different and very interesting. Watch carefully. They just got the ball. We just had some sort of a shot on target. We are towards the end of the first half. Goalkeeper plays the ball short. Joel initiates a straight run. We are nowhere ready to pick up players. They've actually got 1, 2, 3, 4 ready to receive the ball. So Joel making that run indicates that you did not scan backwards to see what was developing. You just went on a hunt in a very unstructured manner, which led to the following. Ball was played to the keeper, bang, they go, and they are in possession. So instead of initiating a high press, go into a mid block, which again we'll be talking about in a minute. In a way, it's my fault for not having found the time yet to explain our approach in a 4-3-3 formation in full detail last week, or the one before. You can go back and check. I showed you what the mid block would look like when we go with a 3-4-3 formation. But what is a mid block? It's a term widely used. There are various definitions and interpretations. And let's say that for us, a mid block is when we are compact and narrow collectively, trying to deny the opposition space to play through the central channels of the pitch. Obviously, then the intention becomes that of forcing the opposition wide, or even better, backwards, and to use their attempts to force it centrally as an opportunity to win the ball back. In my moments in principle design, I call it 1.1 or defensive phase 1.1 with intent to reduce the opposition's ball carrier time and space to move or play forward with freedom. So it becomes a 4-4-2 formation where we try to be compact within 30 meters vertically, and where horizontally we are divided into two main blocks, the defensive and the midfield line. What happens is that the two central midfielders hold their ground in the middle of the park, screening the central defense, and the two wingers drop almost in line with these central midfielders to create a well-defined second line. Then, as mentioned to Ivan and Joel before the game against Point Cook, the 9 and the 10 play in line and become centrally the first line of intervention and possibly block any passing lanes. So let's say the opposition move the ball to our wide area on the left, which, as mentioned a few minutes ago, is a wanted scenario, one of the objectives. The 10, as in this case, or the 9, come on an angle in a position so that he can block a passing lane to one of their midfielders just by looking over the shoulder. However, we do not want the 10, in this case, to come too wide as he becomes physically too demanding. He can come almost on the edge in line with the side of the penalty box, and should the ball be played forward in behind, it will be our winger that needs to step out and apply fresh pressure, with the rest of the team shifting and adjusting accordingly, maintaining the same shape in order to keep those lines compact at all times. If they want to force the ball down the flank or force it centrally diagonally, the area is obviously dense enough for us to win the ball back. If they kick it long in behind, as per usual, one of our central defender, usually Dennis, drops on a fault line, or Augustin collects it or clears it. If the opposition instead goes back and wants to restart, again, we can only be happy with that, since that's one of the main objectives of the mid block, which is that of allowing them to play horizontally in their defensive third, where we only need to shift across, keeping our shape intact at all times, ready to intervene when they get frustrated enough to eventually force it centrally or go long.
Again, it all starts with the work of the 10 and 9 in zones 14 and 15, trying not to dive into unwanted tackles or go into solitary hunting, leaving too much space between them and the second line. Their priority is that of controlling and blocking passing lanes as much as possible to opposition players that will naturally populate the areas in between our lines. If they force it, we'll then rely on our central midfielders to do the great job they usually do. The mid-block is an alternative to wanting to win the ball high in the final third, which is impossible to do for 90 minutes straight. When to do one or the other is up to you on the park and requires great communication and, most importantly, synchronization.